And my question is, have you read any good books lately?
Yes,
Oh.
yes. Wendell Berry, read an interview with him that he gave recently, and he mentioned George Bernanos, his Reflections on Liberty, his last essays. And that book is out of print, so I had to do a bit of digging to try to find a copy and have it interlibrary loaned from the university. But that really, really amazing book, very
Really?
insightful. Traditionalist French Catholic writing post-World War II, who really anticipated a lot of things. That was very nice for me to see. And it's always nice to see people that are getting outside of these two dichotomies of religious conservatism on one hand versus liberal, progressive, and irreligious politics, and this kind of like religious social criticism. It was very enjoyable anyway.
Well, good.
Yes, that's good to hear.
It's nice to be reminded of great minds considering fundamental questions. They're always with us, but somehow nobody ever consults with them.
Yes, that's because they're too busy coming up with their own opinions, I suppose.
Well, people who really know something, in order to convey what they know, are going to require people to reflect and think, and there's no time for that in the mass media. There's just no time. You can't get beneath the surface.
That's a very important point. You need to spend time with something. You need to slow down on certain things. You need to give certain things the time that they deserve. And I actually had not read The Divine Comedy since I was in university, a long, long, long time ago. And it kept coming up over and over in many of the things I'm reading. And then Sidi Izzadeen, when I were talking about it. So I've actually been going through it again with some extensive commentaries and with the benefit of more age and hopefully more wisdom. And also not trying to plow through it like a university student, but actually soak things in. And it's remarkably profound work, and also something that I'm honestly shocked and embarrassed how little I got out of it when I first read it.
It has that reputation.
It's a deep allegory. Some of it reflects a little bit of the social situation at the time, but it's been a while since I've read it, but it was really good.
Well, I think it's worth considering the question, what other things do we lose when we don't have time?
Well, we lose self-awareness. We lose penetrating anything in depth. We may not have time for anything other than picking a right answer from the talking points rather than actually trying to understand.
I guess I'd like to suggest one of the things we lose is compassion.
That's probably true.
Which requires some interior processing and understanding and
right. If we were at a slower pace, we would have the time to notice more human things about human beings and not have to size them up and judge them immediately and move on. And it takes time to develop relationships, and it takes, one of the things we do is sit in front of the media and hopefully fed some good stuff, but the art of conversation between people is very estranging.
Is very what?
Estranging. I just made that up.
It is?
Yes, not having those conversations.
Oh, I see. Yes, not having a conversation is estranging.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
in
that's
that
right.
individual island. But giving yourself more time is really valuable. One of the things that Guy Finley talks about again and again and again is just slow down. Just slow down. Not all the way down, but make it a point not to go as fast as your automatic habits might have you go. You have to be present to slow down, and you may notice some things that you miss otherwise.
Yes, just a little to be more present.
Yeah, but if practiced, that's a lot of opportunity to be present.
Indeed. Well, shall we get to our questions? I've just opened them. We'll let you ask.
First one, how can we go through life treating people, animals, and the planet as divine emanations rather than things?
Well, we can slow down.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, one of the most obvious things that we overlook all too easily is what an incredible miracle this all is. and it's not explainable.
No.
And I mean, it's the most majestic thing there is.
Yes. And as you say, it's not explainable. And we share this miracle with those other creatures. But really, to see them as divine, we need to have a different attitude with ourselves.
Yes.
We need to see ourselves in that light. And this appreciation for the miracle begins, I think, with, if not understanding, at least introspection.
That's the introspection stage, is where it really gets, where it deepens. But to realize that you, just like all the other people, animals, and even the planet, that you are the same divine mystery. You are an expression of something you know not what.
Right. Well, I, to some degree, have always had that sense. But I know some people have that sense. Other people seem to be very keen to have others just hand them answers to these questions.
Well, of course.
And what makes that difference?
They seem to be fundamental psychological types, and they're found on both the right and the left, but I think they predominate. I mean, that most of them, maybe only a small majority, are on the right.
Well, there's, as I said, we're all handed doctrines all the time. And if the question is, what does this all mean? Who am I and what am I doing here? What makes the difference between those who will take an easy answer and those who will ponder the deepest question there is?
Lack of curiosity.
What makes that difference?
Lack of curiosity is a fundamental one.
Is that because curiosity's been discouraged, or is it hardwired?
I don't know. It may be hardwired to a certain extent. It's
That one
certainly
of the
discouraged.
things education should be for?
Exactly. So it's discouraged in our current mass education. And there's no reward unless you have to write a paper on the subject you choose yourself. And then you have to be curious about something to find what to put in the paper. But no, I mean, there's no place. And remember, we're talking about the lives of children. A huge fraction of these people are spending time in an environment where there is no sense of wonder. There is no encouraging to take a flight of thought or fancy, and it's toxic. It kills.
It is toxic.
6 to 8 hours of children's school age, 5 times a week, is subtracted from their natural opportunities to learn in their own ways and be inquisitive, or even just meditate in nature, which is something I did. I was about 4 years old when I started going into the woods, and I would go there alone often. That may have helped blunt some of the corrosive forces in public school.
There was a very interesting program on PBS not that long ago about an examination of the best elementary schools in the country. And I forget how they had assessed them, but there was some sort of objective standard for which these schools were judged. It wasn't simply things like grades and test scores and so forth. But what was interesting is they ran the gamut from those that were very strict 3 R's, highly regimented curricula, to those where, the students were laying on the floor and it seemed to be somewhat chaotic. But what all of the schools had was a senior leader who was on a mission.
Oh, all the highly performing ones. That
Right.
makes sense.
And that says something about what's possible and what to do,
Right. And it sort of gives a lie to the whole university teacher training thing. You can't just take just anyone and run them through some methods courses and things like that and have them be a good teacher. You just can't.
Right, indeed.
There are a lot of ills traceable to public education. Not public education itself, but the form it's taken. Because without school, people would learn from adults, and it would be personal interaction, and whatever seemed to be pertinent would enter the teaching. And on a personal level, a person can teach courage, the virtues, and there aren't any textbooks on the virtues. And you also you would feel more connected to all the generations. And I think you would just feel like you belong more. But a good teacher can really help with that. Somebody with a passion for their subject matter, who really, really cares to communicate it. Those are the teachers that I have valued when I went through public school.
Yes, I think that I can say that too. We're not answering this question, but it's a good discussion.
Oh, it's a great discussion, so keep on.
So part of a good education would be sharing the awe and the miracle of existence, as well as the other creatures that share our existence.
Right. Well, and if you encourage curiosity and let children start asking questions, they might be able to more easily figure out what an astounding miracle it all is. Because there's so many questions that just aren't sufficient. And there's so many answers that aren't sufficient. And even if you fall back on literal meaning of Genesis, you still have all of this stuff as a divinely intended process going on. So it's still connected with the divine if you can see that, if somebody points you to it.
Yes. Could we hear some others here?
Well, I actually think everything you've been saying is great. I think education is important. I think we need to really think about how we educate children and how children are raised today, because that affects them to such a large extent growing up. I think not just as children, but as adults, you need to have time to yourself, you need to have space, you need to have freedom. And even within those spaces that you're working, it's important to have diversity. It's important that kids do a lot of different things, that they go into the woods and run around and are a bit feral. And it's important for adults that if they're going to work 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day or 6 hours a day, that it's broken up a bit maybe. If someone, let's say, does some intellectual work at the computer, do it for 4 hours and then do some manual labor for 4 hours. Wouldn't people be much happier if their 8-hour day was half a day in the office and half a day doing some manual labor? It would just engage so much more of the different aspects of their being. And also, drawing on something that Lewis Mumford said, I think that we should have polytechnics rather than monotechnic. Right now, people are so focused on just use of specific devices and specific tools, and they've forgotten how to use other tools. And he brought up the story of when the Americans are trying to land at Normandy, all the best scientists couldn't figure out how to get through the hedges, and it was actually someone that was relatively uneducated and trained in arts and crafts who figured out how to cut through the hedges. And we're losing something by not having that balance. If you're going to instruct kids in programming, you should also instruct them in art and also traditional gymnastics and physical activity, so that you get well-balanced people. There's a reason that they called people from the Renaissance, like Renaissance men, because they had such a wealth of knowledge from all these different areas. And I'll bring up Mumford again. He says, by focusing more and more and more on less and less and less, we just end up knowing less.
True. And things shouldn't be left to the experts in the sense of someone who was trained in a specialty. They won't have a place in their imaginations for questions that they haven't anticipated. So there's a reason to be a little skeptical about experts. If they really do know more than you ought to avail yourself of them.
Oh, absolutely, you should. But it's important also that you don't have specialization to the point that it limits you, where you have 100 years ago, a scientist might have been an expert in biology, but they knew enough about the other fields to have an intelligent conversation with others. But now you have people that are specialists, and I've heard stories about this, like in some places like Caltech, that you have in the physics department itself, physicists that are so specialized within their own fields of physics that they sit down to lunch and can't find anything to talk about other than media or sports, because they don't understand fully the other's field. And I think that's very limiting.
Well, that may go part way to explaining why we have such an obsession with sports. You don't have to really think, cheer for your team, or to admire a football pass or a home run or something like that.
How are we doing?
We're doing well. I'll just sort of answer the question with a little story that John Moriarty says about that the Native Americans have. He said the dolphins used to live on the land and were related to the people, but the dolphins decided to jump into the seas and let the seas mold them, and the people decided to mold the land. And I think the way that we can treat things less as things is to be more like the dolphins. Let things mold us rather than us trying to mold everything to our vision of how it should be.
Right. Well, it does whether we know it or not, but we're not open to all the ways that it could mold us. But it's about time the Native Americans came up in this discussion.
Yes.
Would you care to elaborate on that? Is there anything that, and I know both of you have had many interactions with Native Americans over the years and their thoughts. Is there something that you would like to share that you think is particularly useful or profound?
Well, they tend to see the world in spiritual terms.
One tends to see the
Some with
world.
grander visions than others, but if you think about walking with respect on the earth and the fact that the animals had spiritual significance and the grandfather in the sky, but just all, they lived in a natural environment and they didn't make the separation. They knew that their lives depended on the provenance of the earth and the buffalo migrations and things like that. And we don't have that sense of interdependency with the things around us.
No, and they saw themselves as part of a greater whole.
Exactly. Exactly. And all that greater whole had value.
Right. Right. Yes, exactly.
It wasn't just something to be exploited.
All right, I'll move on to the next question. Many of the cardinal sins have turned to virtues lauded by the people, such as pride. How can the path help us to be more humble people? And how can we maybe relearn that some of these things that we now take as virtues are detrimental to ourselves on the path?
I remember quite a few years ago when I realized that bad people, in quotes, consider their vices to be virtues. But it's pride that keeps them attached to whatever qualities they're manifesting. And if it feels good, it must be good. And the energy of being angry, for instance, it activates something pleasurable. It's like we feel real when we have those.
Yes. What's at the root of this phenomena? Isn't it identification?
Well, yeah.
Isn't it the mistaken notion of me?
Well, of course. And the path can help because it regards the virtues as divine.
Mm-hmm.
And part of spirituality is to allow them to work through you. But you don't get to own them.
Yes, that's right. They're not yours.
They're not yours, exactly. In a certain way, the vices are not yours either, but they belong to a collective externalized mentality that you can't do anything with.
All right. Well, how proud should I be of my new book?
Well, you shouldn't be proud at all, but you can be pleased.
Okay, I'm willing to take that. Can you put a little finer point on this?
Well, it's not a sin to feel good after an accomplishment.
Well, at some point it is.
Well, I mean, to the extent that you're identified with the thing as fundamentally connected to your identity. I mean, all your life you haven't been writing books, and now there's this book. And so it really can't be fundamental to you.
No, certainly.
But if something is a labor of love, you're going to love the labor that went into it.
Certainly.
And when something turns out well, then why shouldn't you feel good about something that was good? It's not, what you accomplish is not a fundamental attribute of the individual ego.
Well, if people don't like it, should I feel bad about myself?
No. I mean, if enough people don't like it and the criticism bites, then you can have second thoughts. But the process of going from the idea to the finished product is a good in itself.
That's true. I would attest to that experience. All right, enough about me. What do you think of me?
Well, Just I'll add regarding, let's say, your book. You said, well, what if people don't like it? If people don't like it and they don't like it for good reasons and it helps you to write something better in the future, alhamdulillah. And if people don't like it for the wrong reasons and you know and those around you know that you did it right, alhamdulillah. So either way, alhamdulillah.
And that's the general case for all experience, really.
Yes.
Right. And you can also have some consolation, as if you really need consolation, that you didn't write the book for those people.
Okay, yes, thank you.
You didn't know who they were individually until they manifested themselves, but you knew you weren't writing for everybody.
That's right.
And also the part of the question about how can the path help us, there's an important part of any path is learning humility.
It's the key virtue, it seems to be.
It seems to me because it's a willing receptiveness to what's greater than ourselves.
Well said. I think that's exactly true.
It's sort of like that's, you might say, active side of humility.
Yes, and I think the active side of humility probably doesn't get enough attention.
Well, probably not. But you can't be humble and draw attention to it.
Yes. You can't just get better at being humble and be pleased with it.
Yeah, you don't have to be pleased about it, but you can enjoy it. You can be grateful that you have it.
You can be grateful, yes. These things are also important. Yes, you can be grateful and you can celebrate that.
Yes.
Alhamdulillah.
And moderation is the key. And that's one of the defining teachings of Islam. Where in the world, there's lots of good things in the world, but don't overdo it. Food is good, but if you have too much, it'll kill you. Even water, which you need, will kill you if you have too much of it. So people need money to get by in the world, but if your entire basis for living is getting more and more and more money and forgetting all the other things, that's bad, just like too much food, like too much water, like too much pride.
Right.
Anything too much quantity is bad, but also too little can be bad. So moderation.
Yeah. And one of the nice things about moderation is that it allows you to be more well-rounded and not have aspects of the human soul atrophy.
Yes, indeed.
Which is another reason to have a wide variety of educational experiences. Referring back to that, the field trip is the closest they've ever come. But there's a big difference between really exploring something and walking through a museum, for instance. Not that the museums are bad, but one doesn't engage in, there are a lot of ways that one doesn't engage in that kind of field trip. A field trip out into the forest has a lot of possibilities.
Yes, and that tends to be, I think, because in the museum you see everything as an object.
Yeah.
And in the forest, you actually, to a greater degree, participate in what you're seeing. You're part of that scene, not just a viewer.
And you're surrounded by living things, which helps. And another aspect to a more field trip format is that the kids can learn a lot from each other. The other people on the field trip are part of the experience. So if somebody shows a strong sense of wonder about something, you may be interested in looking at that more closely, in recognizing the positive side of that kind of engagement. So that's all. We don't have to go back to the first question completely.
Which question are we answering?
3, I think, is coming up.
3 is coming up, unless Seda Zainab has something to contribute.
No, I'm enjoying the discussion, especially pride and humility. But if I had to add, I would probably add, most often the pride or humility doesn't come from accomplishing a goal. It comes from journeying towards the goal. So one becomes more humble or proud during the whole process of coming to the goal or reaching the goal. But it's not necessarily the attainment of the goal that makes one proud.
Well, proud in the negative sense certainly can happen, though. I mean, if somebody wins a gold medal in the Olympics and they think they're the greatest of all time, they may have done better than anyone else ever did in that one thing. But I mean, one should have a sense of wonder about one's accomplishments too. How did that happen?
It's that difference between what I do and who I am.
But those darker side of, well, I mean, pride in general is considered a vice. And though people are proud of their children and proud of their countries and all that, but that's nonsense. They can be pleased with their children. They can be grateful they live in this country. But standing up and saying, I'm proud to be an American, that's perversion even of pride. Because you appropriate something external to make you somebody. So it all starts with an overestimation of oneself. And your accomplishments might reinforce that overestimation. And that's a trap. So sometimes a lot of failure may actually be better for people. And if we were paying attention, we'd see how often we fail anyway. In little ways and big ways. How many expectations for our own behavior have we fallen short of? So yeah, pay attention.
All right, next question. And I'm not meaning to be like Savonarola here or anything, but how can we be less vain and less concerned about appearances in general?
Well, we can wear all black all the time.
Like Johnny Cash.
Like
Well,
Bashir does.
Yes, but you could be proud of that too.
That's right.
You
That's
could
right.
do that out of vanity. Let's put
It's still something external that you can take as part of your identity, which is an error.
Yes, it's thinking that what others think of you has an effect on who you are.
Yes. And that's one of the things that is really worthy of paying attention to, is how you respond when someone makes a comment about you, positive or negative.
Right, exactly.
And just to catch the moment and see how that's processed.
Right.
See what that has to do with your identity, your sense of self, and your relationship to that person or to others. Very rich ground to explore.
Right. Well, when I was in Al-Anon, 12-step program way back when, my sponsor, I think, is the one who said, what he said was, what other people think of me is none of my business.
I've heard that as a 12-step statement on several occasions, and it's certainly worth it.
Yes, it is. I think I'm done on this one. Is there anything more that
right.
might be there?
Well, there's something about loving others in this, you know? There's something about not using comments about appearances, for example, to define relationships or put one in categories or allow you to put others in categories.
Right. It does that, and it also makes you dependent on them.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
They become, rather than another equal, wondrous being, become
Just part of a codependent relationship.
That's right. Exactly.
That's right. Thank you. Yes. Good. All right. I think we're done now. Okay, Seda Badri?
Yes. You do know Johnny Cash's song, Why I Wear Black, right?
I know there is a song. I don't remember the texts. Would you like to fill us in? I may need these words sometime.
Yes, it's good. It's, well, you wonder why I always dress in black. Well, you never see bright colors on my back. And why does my appearance seem to have a somber tone? Well, there's a reasons for the things I have on. I wear a black for the poor and the beaten down, living in the hopeless, hungry side of town. I wear it for the prisoner who has long paid for his crime, but is there because he's a victim of the time. I wear the black for those who have never read or listened to the words that Jesus said about the road to happiness through love and charity. Why you'd think he's talking straight to you and me. I thought that was good.
Very good.
Did he write that?
Yes, that was one of the songs he wrote. Yes.
Great.
Yes.
Glad to hear it.
Me too.
He done good.
How does the path help one to balance secular and sacred activities?
Well, it inserts sacred activities into the flow of life. Without the sacred activities, there wouldn't be a balance.
Without the secular, there wouldn't either, but that's not possible. Even if you live in a monastery,
But
a lot of stuff is just social.
my sense is that isn't the sense of balance the question intends. Is that right, Seda?
Yes.
I think the balance comes from taking the sacred into the secular.
Oh, yes. Right. Because you can't escape the secular.
Yeah, and you
But
don't have
no,
to escape the
yes.
sacred.
Right. Right. But you can sanctify it.
Right.
And therein is a lot of the spiritual path. It really is.
That's right. The path is lived, and for most of us, it's lived in the world.
Yes, if you want to escape secular activities and go be with God, that's not going to work.
usually.
Much like what your
Usually.
book says, to God through the world.
Yes, that's right. Because that's where he put us.
Right.
Exactly.
So, yes, by bringing the sacred into secular activities and by being the best we can in a full sense of the word, while we must, as destiny has demanded, we live in this world and partake of those activities.
Right. The path helps us be a conduit or a vehicle for what is sacred, even if nobody else sees it, still the way we live. So by bringing the sacred into the secular, you keep the heavens open. Yeah, the secular can't do any of that. You have to have an intuition of the spiritual to get. You might have a sense of the spiritual, even if you're not born with it. Your experiences might push you that direction. But to do it properly, you need to blend the two. And that way there, in a sense, is no duality.
Yes, well said.
All right. If a person came to you saying they wanted to give up all their mundane worldly activities to focus on the spiritual life, how would you respond to them?
Good for you. Let's try that for a while. How can I help?
Yeah. Well, I remember when I found the path, or it found me, I thought that was the ideal. And I remember taking very seriously the hadith that one should make one's earnings, or wait, anyway, that you should earn your way in the world with your left foot rather than your right hand, to put it a little bit lower on the hierarchy. So it's necessary to do it, but don't let it be too much.
I'm going to get off too, but not until I send you this email that just came in from Ted about today's offering for me for a TED Talk. And the talk's, it's titled, I Let Algorithms Randomize My Life for 2 years, an experiment in living
Is this your talk?
spontaneously. It's about living spontaneously. And I just thought it might be interesting.
Well, it could be. Random doesn't always mean meaningless, although...
Well, he says it
does.
opened him up to the beautiful complexity and richness of life.
Yeah, well, that's like what we were talking about before in question number 1, letting the experiences shape one and teach one. And if you want to learn something you didn't know, you need to have experiences that you've never had before.